In the fall of 2016, I moved in an old house built in the 1880s, situated near the original campus of Indiana University. The only lively area had become a park, now frequented by homeless people and drug addicts. The house had been converted into a peculiar duplex, had a history of strange occurrences, which my friend who had lived there before had warned me about. He spoke of haunting and unsettling experiences, but I dismissed his warning as the ramblings of a quirky individual. The layout of the house was unusual. When you walk in the front door, you enter into a space that functions as a living room. From there, a doorway led to the bedroom, and further along was the kitchen. There were only two doors in the entire house, one leading to the bathroom and the other to the shared basement. The rest of the space was open, which gave the house an eerie, almost labyrinthine quality. My first night in the house was quiet, but I felt an underlying sense of unease. Living alone after a long time made me feel vulnerable. As the night wore on, I found myself unable to sleep, and around 3 a.m. I was jolted awake by a cacophony of drumming. It sounded as though a group of drummers was beating on every flat surface in the living room. The noise was relentless and terrifying, echoing through the house in a chaotic rhythm. I was paralyzed with fear. I mustered the courage to investigate, and as soon as I crossed into the living room, the drumming abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was almost more unnerving, and I spent the rest of the night in fitful, uneasy sleep. A few days later, a friend came over for a visit. While we stood by the front door next to my bookshelf, I decided to share the story of the drumming incident. As I was recounting it, something inexplicable happened. A book flew off the shelf and landed there away from us. It had to have flown past the dresser and landed perfectly between us. My friend's face went pale, and he hurriedly made his excuse and left, leaving me alone with the lingering sense of dread. I was determined to understand what was happening. I spoke to the tenant in the other half of the duplex. He had lived there for 8 years, and revealed that no tenant had stayed longer than a year due to the strange occurrences. Oddly, he mentioned that nothing unusual ever happened on his side of the house. Despite my initial skepticism, the eerie events continued. Each night brought its own set of disturbances. Whispers coming from the walls, footsteps pacing outside my bedroom, and an ever-present feeling of being watched. It felt as if an unseen presence was lurking just out of sight, watching my every move. One particularly unsettling night, as I was preparing for bed, a thunderous banging erupted from the basement. It sounded as though someone was attacking the walls with a sledgehammer. My heart raced as I hesitated, but my curiosity and fear pushed me to investigate. I descended the creaky stairs, and with each step, the banging grew louder and more frantic. When I reached the basement, the noise stopped abruptly, and the room was dimly lit and empty, filled only with dusty old furniture and boxes. The oppressive silence that followed was almost deafening, leaving me with an overwhelming sense of unease. The atmosphere in the house continued to grow heavier, and on one evening, while cooking dinner, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence from the bedroom. Terrified, I dropped what I was doing and raced to the room, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I arrived, the bedroom was empty, and the scream had ceased. The only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart, echoing in the stillness. As the strange occurrences grew more frequent, I found myself on the brink of sanity. The feeling of dread was constant, and the unsettling presence seemed to grow stronger. One night, I was jolted awake by terrifying whispering that seemed to come from the very walls. There was a chorus of voices, each filled with malevolence and hatred, creating a symphony of fear. Just as subtly as it began, the whispering stopped and replaced by a low, guttural growl emanating from the foot of my bed. I desperately turned on the bedside lamp, expecting to see an animal or some other mundane explanation for the noise. Instead, what I saw was far from horrifying. Standing at the foot of my bed was a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, and its mouth twisted into a cruel, jagged grin. The figure seemed to exude a palpable malevolence, its form shrouded in darkness, frozen with terror. I could only watch as the figure lunged toward me, its clawed hands reaching out with an inhuman speed. I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst, but when I dared to open them again, the figure had vanished. I was left alone in the darkness, the terror still lingering in the air. Realizing that I could no longer endure the horrors of that house, I packed my bags and fled into the night, leaving behind the nightmares that had tormented me. I vowed never to return. The house and its dark secrets remain a haunting memory, and to this day, I shudder at the thought of what still lurks in the shadows of that cursed place. During a scorching summer event in Memphis, I was making a delivery to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the city, but the tranquility of the fading daylight did little to ease the growing unease I felt as I pulled into the parking lot of the seemingly abandoned warehouse. The only sound were the creaking of old wooden crates and the wind, adding to the eerie atmosphere. I stepped out of my truck, clipboard in hand, and I was met by a gruff-looking man with a thick beard and a loading dock. He then signed for the delivery, and I began unloading the cargo. As the minutes ticked by, the man kept me waiting, claiming there were issues with the paperwork. By the time the clock struck 7 p.m., my driving hours were up, and I needed to find a place to park for my mandatory 10 hours reset. The man suggested I head to a nearby TA truck stop in West Memphis, just across the state line. I thanked him, then climbed back into my rig, feeling exhausted and frustrated. The drive to the truck stop was uneventful, but as I arrived, I was struck by how eerily quiet it was. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I parked my truck at the very back of the lot, where the encroaching darkness seemed to swallow it all. My scruffy terrier, Noodles, sensed my unease and whined from the passenger seat. I then decided to take Noodles for a quick walk to stretch her legs. As we wandered through the deserted lot, I noticed a man standing behind a trailer, staring off into space. His presence sent a chill down my spine, and I quickened my pace, hurrying Noodles back to the truck. After settling Noodles in, I grabbed my dinner bag and headed toward the truck stop's restaurant. As I walked, the sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I turned to see the same man from the trailer following me at a distance. My heart raced, and I picked up my pace, weaving through the rows of parked trucks. But no matter how many turns I took, he seemed to match my pace, always lurking just out of sight. Revealed to search the restaurant, I stepped inside, grateful for the warm, bustling atmosphere. I slid onto a stool at the bar and ordered a burger and fries, hoping that normalcy would ease my nerves. As I waited for my meal, I glanced around, searching for the man, but he was nowhere to be seen. I began to relax, thinking maybe I had imagined the whole thing. As I was half through my meal, nature called, and I excused myself to use the restroom. When I returned, I noticed something unsettling. My fork was now on the right side of my plate, even though I'm left-handed, and always placed my utensils on the left. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had tampered with my food. I called the waitress over, still standing behind my chair, and asked if she had touched my meal. She denied it and said she hadn't seen anyone else near my plate. I requested to speak with the manager. When I arrived, I recounted the events and the strange man, but the manager's expression turned serious. He informed me that after reviewing the security footage, a man had indeed approached my plate while I was in the restroom. He had added something to my mashed potatoes, stirred them, and then left the restaurant. I was horrified. I agreed with the manager, offering to call the police, and as I waited for my new meal, the manager kept a close watch on the restaurant, ensuring my safety. And when the police arrived, they took statements and searched the premises, but they found no trace of the mysterious man. One officer offered to drive me back to my truck, and I gratefully accepted. As we walked through the darkened lot, the officer assured me that his partner would keep a vigilant watch over the area throughout the night. I thanked them both, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. The night had been filled with tension and fear, but thanks to the kindness of these strangers, I felt safe enough to settle in for the night. Noodles curled up beside me in the truck, and despite the lingering sense of dread that the mysterious man might still be out there, I eventually managed to drift off to sleep. The terror of the evening slowly faded into the safety of the night. That uneasy feeling of being watched remained, a reminder of the unsettling encounter I had just survived. When I was around 13, I spent the night at my cousin's house, nestled in the countryside. The small cozy home was enveloped by tall trees and darkness. His parents were out of town, leaving us alone with the freedom to stay up late and play video games. The prospect of a night of gaming excited us, and as darkness settled, we huddled in his room. The glow of the TV cast in eerie shadows on the walls. The only sounds were the rhythmic clicking of game controllers and the occasional creak of the old house settling. Lost in the game, I barely noticed when my cousin got up to use the restroom. It wasn't until I felt an unsettling presence behind me that I turned around to see if he had returned. To my confusion, the spot where we had been sitting was now empty. The sinking feeling in my stomach grew as I realized I was alone. I called out for him, but the silence that greeted me was unsettling. As fear began to creep in, I fought the urge to investigate the closet or look under the bed, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But the unease only intensified as hours ticked by, and my cousin still hadn't come back. I decided to leave the safety of the room and ventured into the dimly lit hallway, each shadow and creak amplifying my growing anxiety. I called out again, but only the silence answered. My heart pounded as I approached the bathroom door, hesitating before knocking softly. "Cousin," I whispered, but the only reply was eerie quiet. With trembling hands, I pushed open the door, dreading what I might find. The bathroom was empty, and the panic surged through me as I realized my cousin had vanished without a trace. Frantically, I searched the house, my calls echoing through the darkened rooms. The minutes stretched into hours, and my fear grew unbearable. What if something had happened to me? What if something malevolent was lurking in the house with us? My heart raced as tears threatened to spill when I heard it. A faint, desperate whisper cutting through the silence. I knew I needed help. The whisper, barely audible over the pounding of my heart, sent icy chills down my spine. Guided by the haunting plea, I followed the sound through the empty house, my footsteps echoing ominously. The whisper led me to the basement, a place that had always unsettled me, even in daylight. As I descended, the cold shadow filled the stairs. An overwhelming sense of dread enveloped me. I hesitated at the bottom, straining to listen for any sign of life. Then I heard it, a soft, sorrowful cry coming from the far corner of the room, hidden in the shadows. Slowly I approached, my footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. In the dim light, I finally saw him, my cousin, huddled in the corner, his face streaked with tears. Relief flooded through me as I rushed to his side and wrapped him in a tight embrace. "What happened?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear. His eyes, wide with terror, met mine. "I don't know," he whispered. "I was in the restroom, and then something grabbed me, something cold and unhuman." A chill ran down my spine as I listened to his terrified account. Whatever happened was beyond comprehension, something dark and malevolent. With our hearts racing, we made our way back upstairs, our fear palpable. We locked ourselves in his room, too terrified to venture into the dark unknown. As the night wore on, we huddled together, clinging to each other for comfort. The terror of the evening left us shaken, knowing that whatever had occurred would forever change us. The darkness of that night and the unknown terror we faced together left an indelible mark, a haunting reminder that some experiences are beyond explanation and leave scars deeper than night itself.